Good morning. Good morning. Good morning and welcome. We're gonna get started. I'm Bill Peterson, pastor. I don't recognize some faces, so we want to make sure that those of you who are visiting with us feel welcomed. I'm pastor here at St. Gabriel, and we welcome you as we gather today for Dr. Dearman's lecture. Just a few housekeeping rules. If you need restrooms, they're back in that corner. The kitchen's back in the narthex. Just go straight down from the kitchen bar and you'll see them in that far corner. There's water here. There's a water fountain right through these doors here if you happen to need some water. We will break. Andy will go for about 50 minutes or so, and then we'll break. We'll have you some coffee and some water back here actually too. I'll try to get you some there, and we'll have a little break, about 15 minutes or so, and then Andy will come back. We'll come back and we'll finish with another about 45-minute section, something like that. So, Andy, I think most of you may know Andy Dearman, but I'm not assuming anything. So, Andy's a native of Statesville, North Carolina, and he is an honorably retired pastor in the Presbyterian Church USA. His undergraduate was at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. His Master's of Divinity was at Princeton Theological Seminary, and he received his PhD from Emory in Atlanta. His first teaching segment was at LSU, and then Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary hired him away pretty soon after he got started. You hardly had your feet cold or warm there before you got hired to come to Austin. He was in Austin for a long while at Austin Seminary, where he served as academic dean for 6, 7, 9 years. How many years? 6? It's 6. It felt like 10, right? I know. Andy finished his career with Fuller Theological Seminary. And he is a senior professor of Old Testament at Fuller, and he retired in 2019. He's the author of several books, periodicals. He has reviewed many, sat on the board of many biblical translations. He is a noted scholar and a recognized scholar internationally on Israel's ancient history and culture. He is also an archaeologist, which you'll see today comes in quite handy, and he has served on archaeological boards across the Middle East where he has dug and studied widely. Andy, we welcome you today. We appreciate your efforts, and I'm going to turn them over to you.
I'm on. Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that, Bill. Thanks for coming out. Delighted to have you here. This is the first of a two-part presentation. Let me rephrase that. A four-part presentation. I'll do 2 parts today and 2 next week. More about the 2 today as I get started. One thing I want to say, if it's an informal presentation, if you'd like to get up and move a little closer, you can. I realize that's really hard for people in church to get up once they sit down. But every step you're closer, it's easier to see things on the screen. And if you don't move, that means you're just comfortable in church and you're not going to do anything. I understand. But if you'd like to move forward, now is the time to do so. Okay, today we're going to go by pictures and some charts. A few comments also on the screen, and some, of course, from me verbally, to a place called Dura, Europos. And I'll start by saying that that's a hybrid name, and nobody in the ancient world ever called it Dura, Europos. It's a modern statement, and it's just fine. It's not a right or a wrong. But if you were of European extraction, you called it Europos. And if you were from Semitic extraction, you called it Dura. And even if you spoke both a Semitic language and Greek or Latin, You could kind of tell which one you preferred by the way you chose it. So in inscriptions, it's referred both ways, but it's never called in the ancient world Dura Europos. We're going to do that. Or if I get tired of saying it, I'll just say DE, if that's okay. All right, friends, as you're looking at this, a couple of books help explain something about the place. I'll start by saying we all will recognize the name Pompeii. Think of the treasures that we will all have a chance to see, literally to see, because of that terrible tragedy of Mount Vesuvius. One day, great city. Next day, covered with ash, many people died, and it sealed the life of that city for centuries until we began to excavate it. And it's still revealing treasures. Dura Europos, in some senses of the term, is the Pompeii of the East. It's a very interesting subject, how people in the modern times discovered it is a place that ought to be excavated. I'm going to skip that because it takes a little while to tell it, and we have other things to do today. But I will say to you that its conclusion, a sad conclusion, is the reason that there's so many treasures that we do get a chance to see. Dura Europos was under siege by some troops from the east. If you're thinking in terms of the modern map, think of Iran or Persia. They didn't use those terms. They used the term Sasanian, was the name of the group of the tribes that were expanding to their west. And they laid siege to Dura Europos. Dura Europos had some significant walls around it. They pushed the walls in. They undermined them from the top, the middle, the bottom. They stuffed in logs, set them on fire. They had siege. It was a serious siege. And they pushed over the outside walls, and it covered up a number of the buildings that were on the inside of the city. And those particular buildings had a number of wonderful things in them, and it's like a time capsule in some sense. It just got sealed. And for a variety of reasons, the city was never settled again by more than just, say, campers here and there, eventually forgotten in time, only to be rediscovered accidentally, and some of its treasures in the late 19th and early 20th century. So it's a crossroads of antiquity. It was a caravanserai. It was also part, friends, of the Silk Road. So it would have had connections in trading that went a long way back to the east. Even if what we would call today people of Chinese extraction didn't come that far, they had connections that went as far to the east as China. And the western end of the Silk Road, of course, was in places like Cairo or Istanbul, Constantinople back in the day. And this is one of the stops on it. So it was a big place for trading. It was also an army encampment. At one point, it had approximately 10,000 Roman soldiers there. So you can see from these two books that I'm quoting or showing you up here, it was a real mixture of cultures and religion, very vibrant. Some people did very well in the trading business. And so I'm going to show you a number of aspects of it so you can look at it on your left-hand side as you see that, and I'll have some that will go full exposure, but it sits right beside the Euphrates River. And it sits up on a bluff, so as the flow of the river over time wore its way through the terrain, the harder rock here got higher and higher. And so parts of it sit up as far as 300 feet above the plain. So it gives you natural defenses. And it was used defensively as an outpost or a station for soldiers off and on for several centuries. Now you can see from the title up there that it lasted about 5+ centuries, give or take. Sometimes we don't know exactly when it was founded and if there were anybody at all there before it was built by one of Alexander the Great's generals after Alexander the Great had died. But the map on your right, and again the print is very difficult. You might be able to read such things as, let's see right here, where it says Jordan or Iraq using modern terms. But by the way, just FYI, you know, maps sometimes tell you about political affiliation. This is a map that I took. It's in English, but I took it from a Syrian source. So you'll see that the name of the place down there is called Palestine. Anyway, so the main road, Damascus is right here, runs up like this. You have the Euphrates coming down right here. There are a couple of dams on it because they need water. Euphrates comes, of course, out of Turkey. And right here in the middle, I just mention it right now, is a very, very famous city from the ancient world named Palmyra. You'll recognize that name. Dura Europos is going to be right over here. Right there. So it's very near the border with Iraq today. Okay, once they decided, they being historians and so forth, that this was a place they wanted to excavate, they had to get their arrangements made and so forth. And they did fly an airplane over, and you look at that, and in black and white, that looks kind of desolate, doesn't it? Now, I married somebody from West Texas. I love West Texas, but you know, you can be out there, it looks a little desolate sometimes. And the same way here, and you get an idea of the terrain from this picture. So you can see there is the Euphrates, and here is what was called the Western Wall right here. It's the one that got pushed in by the invading forces, and so the best preserved places are right along the wall here. And what our Arab friends call a wadi, that's a seasonal water channel, is on both sides right here. So the only place that's hard to defend is going to be your Western Wall right here. You have almost natural defenses everywhere else, including a high bluff right here, even though there was a wall all the way around the city. Yale University and a French Research Society together did this excavation over a number of years. And because of the date and before it's the rise of individual nations in this time, remember this was all part of the Ottoman Empire until World War I, and it took a while to sort things out afterwards. What that meant was that a French and American team digging there got to take a number of the things they excavated and, quote, bring them home. Today, of course, if there's an excavation in Syria, the Syrians decide what happens to their stuff. Don't you think that's fair? I mean, I do. I think it's fair. But they did not decide at this point. So some things are in the museum in Damascus. Some things are in the museum of Yale University. If you ever go to their museum, it's wonderful. And I'll show you some pictures from how they reconstructed the things they found. And some things are in the Louvre, as you might imagine, because of the French Research Society. But anyway, a number of things are well preserved from the excavation. Okay, so a general of Alexander the Great, his name was Seleucus. Seleucus, that's right. Sounds like a dog's name, doesn't it? Seleucus, and his Nicator was his other name, and he decided that he would expand his control. After Alexander the Great died, the generals kind of carved up stuff and decided, well, I'll take this, you take that. And the general decided he would build an army encampment and a kind of regional city on this bluff. It was about the year 300 BC, approximately. Nobody knows exactly the date. And it would be under the control of this Greek administration for a couple of centuries. And then from the east, a group of people that call themselves, or we call them the Parthians, but they were from what is today Iran or ancient Persia, and they wanted to move to the west and take over. You know how that goes? The people in Greece said, we want to go east and take over, and the people in the east said, we want to go west and take over. And this is right in the middle. So the Parthians took over for a while, and then the Romans took it for a while, and then the Sasanians, who were also from Persia, who succeeded the Parthians. It's kind of complicated, isn't it? Decided they wanted it, and so it's kind of give and take back and forth. So between the trading connections and the various army units and its origin from the general of Alexander the Great, it's a marvelous multicultural laboratory. Now, that last bullet point, friends, in its 5 centuries, the city had at 18, that's probably a conservative term. They had some smaller places, you might want to call them shrines, and some larger places. No massive temples that you will sometimes see, but some of them were pretty good size. But many, many temples, at least 18, a synagogue without parallel. And that's the second half of the presentation today. I might start crying when I see it. It's just so amazing that it survived. A Christian house church, that's next week. Possibly the oldest surviving Christian structure in the world. I'll show that to you. That's my advertisement. Please come back. And also a Mithraeum, a fast-growing religion, Christianity, and another one called Mithras, or the worship of Mithras, were two that took off in the first 2 or 3 centuries. And they had a very nice Mithraeum here too. A handful of those have survived until modern times. So today I'm going to show you something about the life of the temples. And then the second half of the synagogue. Next week I'm going to show you the house church and the Mithraeum. Truth in advertising. Okay, a map again. Even if you're on the front row, you won't be able to read everything about it. Let me just give you literally the contours. So everything in green right here is the expanding Parthian Empire. So let's get started. If you look right here, there's the Black Sea, and there's the Caspian Sea right there. There's the Persian Gulf. There's the Red Sea right here. So there's Jerusalem, Syria, Damascus. There's Dura, Europos, right there. And so it's right on the edge of the green, you see? You know our friends who live in Strasbourg? Now, is that a French or a German city? Yes. It's a French and German city, depending on which time in history you ask. Same thing about Dura, Europos. It even had more cultures in it. But the Parthians in the first century made a big expanse to the west, so far that they came down here for a while, and Herod the Great, and as he was trying to take over at the appointment of the Romans, had to fight against the Parthians. So they were a force to be reckoned with. Okay, here's a photograph and lots of labels. And again, even if you're on the front row, you won't be able to read all of it, but you're going to depend on me, and I'm going to do my best to introduce you a few things. This is a different angle than you saw previously in the black and white photo from the 20s. Please nod your head. Thank you. You will, of course, see the Euphrates right here. You can see from this photo how impressive the bluffs are. That's natural defenses right there. And you'll see how what's called the North Wadis right here and the South Wadi right there is cut in from the infrequent, but it does rain occasionally. It will run down through that lowest points there. And so that helps provide some security. So here's the west wall. Now, in its later phases of its existence, there was a big army camp right here called the Roman camp. And the main gate to go out of the city is right here, and it goes back to the west towards Palmyra, that very large city of an oasis right there in the middle of what is today Syria. And it was laid out by the European mentality. It has an agora, or an open area, right here in the middle. And it has a palace and some administrative buildings right here, so they got a nice view of the water. Good choice for a palace. And then there'll be various temples and houses and so forth. You know, at its peak, it could have 20,000 people living there, and of course many more outside the walls who are doing things like agriculture and trade and so forth. And you had people coming in and out on the highway that ran nearby for trade. So again, the wall gets pushed in right here, and more importantly for us, the siege took a while. You know, sometimes you can have sieges that last years, longer than a decade. It's amazing how long a siege can last. This one lasted for well over a year, And so a number of the places which are built along this western wall, some of them actually abutted or came into the wall, and some are very close to it. When it looked like the besieging army was going to make some headway in undermining or sapping the walls, they started bringing in debris and stones and rubble, trying to reinforce from the inside. And a number of the places that were built right up against the wall or very close to it also got filled up with dirt. I know it's kind of hard to think about. So a temple, or this magnificent synagogue that I'm going to show you in a little while, was filled almost all the way to the top with dirt, hoping to reinforce against the wall. When the wall got pushed in, what it does is it seals all of those buildings along the wall. So it's just like, again, a moment in time. They're there, they got dirt in them, so nobody's using them for those last few weeks, but then, boom, it came down. So much of what I'm going to show you in terms of the paintings are from buildings along the wall. Now, if you had stone carvings and altars and temples, and I'm going to show you a number of those in just a few minutes, they're going to survive. The only way you destroy those, you have to break them up. And they're there for forever. But paintings, frescoes, so forth, those are tough. And so the fact that they have survived here is wonderful for us, bad, of course, for the people who were there. The archaeologists have found Roman soldiers, or their remains, still dressed in their armor, who died and got left there. Some of them were in underground chambers and so forth. But it was quite a fight. And the city was not resettled again. The wind blows, it gets covered up and forgotten. Now, some deities and their worship at Dura Europos, the kind of broad culture of the area. That's what you're going to get for these next few minutes. Now, that's a stone carving. What strikes you when you first see that, friends? Not everybody has to answer it once. I'll tell you what it does for me, but as you're thinking about it, what strikes you when you see it? It's the wall sitting on her head, to put it in a kind of colloquial way. Yeah, that's a wall sitting on her head. And the reason we know that is there are a number of pictures of deities from this place with walls or buildings on their heads. Why, you want to ask? I can see it on your face. You want to know why? Very good reason. So much of a polytheistic worldview depends on the particularity of time and place. I mean, you've got lots of powers out there in that way of thinking. They need to be engaged. But those that are concerned about us are the ones we're most interested in interacting with. So there'll be a number of representations from this greater part of the world of deities with portions of the city on their head, because they are thought of as the patrons of the city. And my second point would be, for many people in the world today, they can identify themselves, say, as an American, or a Bolivian, or Norwegian. You could do that in the ancient world, but many more people identify themselves by one of two properties: the clan/tribe, or the city near them. And what we think of as nations, a group of cities and a central administration, does happen all the time in the ancient world, but lots of people did not think of themselves, first of all, in that way. They identify themselves by the tribe or the place where they live. And so, very important, this is going to be one of the deities, a goddess, one of the deities particularly concerned with and for the city of Dura, or Europos, D-E. Now, what's her name? It's kind of hard to know because it's not written there, and there was more than one goddess, and so we're already in a bit of speculation. We're not going to go down that rabbit trail, list all 4 or 5 options. The dove of peace on either side will tell you one thing: this is a peaceful deity. She wants the best for D.E. Now, one of the other things I like about it, since I'm bald-headed, I love a good head of hair. Isn't that wonderful? I wonder about the dexterity to carve that. That's impressive. And I like other people's jewelry. I don't wear any. That's a set of earrings right there. Now, this may be Atargatis. That would be a deity from this region, a Semitic deity. It could be Artemis, because both of them were worshipped here in Dura. Okay, so a couple of comments about the polytheism, the multiculturalism, the dynamism of the city. So it's founded by the Greeks, as I mentioned to you. It's both a crossroads and a caravanserai. So people will actually stop there. They'll remember the camels, the 18-wheelers of the day and time. They're coming through on a regular basis, both directions. So they need care and feeding. And so they had what we think of as camps or inns where people could stay, places for the animals. Of course, there is water in the river. That's great, since it's a desert otherwise. And so they had plenty of water. The town has some connections, particularly with Palmyra. More about that in a moment. And that's a Syrian town, to use current lingo, and a Mesopotamian town, particularly Hatra. And these are big multicultural cities on their own with connections. And so a number of people also moved to DE to expand their trading repertoire and their business and so forth. And so lots of connections between those three cities and 2 or 3 other cities around as well. To which we have to add, remember, the army barracks. Okay, so a Roman military occupation began in the year 165 CE, and they continue to kind of off and on tussle. You know, it's one of these things, sometimes it's a, shall I use a modern term, cold peace? Okay, you know. Sometimes lots of tensions. Kind of hard to tell. It could go back and forth. But finally it does fall in this year 256. We know the actual year, the date, and not to be settled again. Okay, some temples. Again, don't think of temples in this city as huge, extravagant structures. Most of them would not be as large as our sanctuary here. Sometimes they're a little more than a large room. The other thing to remember is one can do worship and interaction outside the temple itself, because the temple is meant to project the presence of deity, not to provide us a place to sit down and worship or standing worship. It's to represent the deity. Now, one of the interesting things about DE is that a temple could have the service of more than one deity. That's not always the case. And if some of you say, now what about that? Now, we're a Presbyterian church here, good Methodist church right over here. Some temples would have priestly service, daily worship, weekly worship, whatever kind of worship was part of their cult, and it would be in the same place. Sometimes it might be they'd have 2 or 3 side rooms. And so if it's Artemis, you're over here. If it's Zeus, you might be over here. If it's Atargatis, you might be over here. So when you read about Dura Europos and it says, well, the temple of Adonis and the temple of this, those names don't mean too much, because it may include the worship of several other deities. For example, let me see if I can go back here, friends. This wonderful plaque right here came from the temple of Adonis. But she had her place there too. And I'll show you on several occasions how that's the case. So this is a temple, had steps going up. It's not so large. The interior is not so large. Remember, it's meant to project the presence of a deity. The courtyard is often larger, because it might have an altar, might have a number of other things going on. It's called the Temple of Artemis. So it was from the European, the Greek side of things. Artemis, one of the great goddesses of the Greek pantheon. And so on the left-hand side, you go up, and on the right-hand side, you go down, and you're inside. Again, it's not so large. Okay, now here is a temple of Bel. If you look at it, friends, first thing to note is go up here, also known as the temple of the Palmyrene or Palmyrene gods. This is it was up against the western wall, so even its paintings get preserved. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at it. And it sponsored the worship of several deities, some of which are particularly associated with Palmyra. Again, showing you the connection between the two cities. You can see in the background part of the city wall, and then the top of the inside the temple right here would have been in the courtyard, and a small gate to the side right there. Those all are remains after the excavation. So the next few things I'm going to show you come from the Temple of Bel. Bel is well known from places like Babylon, and it's his headquarters, if I could put it that way, or his center of worship is in the east, but it spread to the west. Okay, very quickly, it had phases to it, and there won't be an exam, and you probably don't care, and that's okay, but it did last over time, and the excavators could tell you that it started small and it got a little more complicated. But here was the city wall right here, so you had a courtyard right there, and then the inside would have been right there. Again, modest size. The inside might be about half of our sanctuary right here. Okay, so one of the stone carvings that came from this Temple of Bel / Temple of the Palmyrene gods, Temple of the Oriental gods, it used to be called. So here is a carving that was put into a side niche. One picture is worth 1,000 words. So the heading up here simply names for you the four deities. Now you'll have to trust me. They're named for you down here in Aramaic script. So on the left, you'll see a deity sitting on a throne or a chair. On your right, you'll see a deity sitting on a chair, and two standing up here in the middle. Now, they'll each have individual elements about them. Without going into too much detail, Baal Shamin would be the pronunciation, or closer to the pronunciation. You'll recognize the term Baal or Baal if you read a few lines in the Old Testament, right, friends? Just nod your head. Yeah, it's the Semitic word for owner or lord or master. So Baal could have a personal name, but it's used so often. Think of how in other traditions, ours included, or at least mine included, you say, "Oh Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth." Lord is not a name, it's a title. So Shamin is the word for heavens. This is the Lord of the heavens. Now this one right here, let's just pronounce his name is Yarhebol and Aglibol. They're both standing up, and they have on short skirts, which means they're ready to fight if they have to. They have a militaristic element. You'll notice these deities, when they're sitting down, they got on long gowns. They're happy. They're at peace. When you sit on a throne and you're at rest, you wear a nice long formal gown, if you're a man. But if you've got to get ready to fight, you've got to have on your skirt, your shoes, staff, so forth. These two deities are very popular at Palmyra. Baal comes from the east, but is also worshipped here, and Baal Shamin is also worshipped in this area, and he goes all the way to the west, part of the Old Testament culture. So here you've got a temple with four different deities who are venerated there and set on together as if they have a kind of harmony. This gives you another clue to a polytheistic way of thinking. There are lots of powers out there, is the first mindset. How they relate is sometimes a mystery. But the smart person doesn't put all his or her eggs in one basket, and you've got to kind of have some relation with several of them. That's the logic. So how shall I put it? This is kind of a colloquial way. The four fellows sitting there, those are four powers there in the temple. Okay, now at the entrance of the temple was a small altar. One of the characteristics of this time and place is that there are lots of small altars. By small, I mean one that was not used for animal sacrifice. It would have been used to burn incense, or you could even use it as a kind of tabletop to place something there as a gift, but something that would not be large. And these are the kinds of things that had developed, that were quite popular. Temples had them. Well-to-do people in their homes had them. And they could even be used to generate a nice smell. So if you had a dinner party, you get a little perfume and a little resin, and you light it up, and it gives a nice, sweet smell in your home while people are there. You know, in case the wind blows from the trash dump down the road, ooh, this will help cover that. So these are very popular. Now, one of your illustrations of how, quote, these people lived together. So the inscription on it, right here, and it is in red. Lots of things that were carved in stone had colors. They get worn away over time. The colors here have survived. Now, that's Greek, not Aramaic. And here's the translation. This is one of the gods from, or best known from Palmyra, Yarhibol. For the god Yarhibol, Scribonius Mucianus. Good Latin name. That tells you a Roman soldier, not just a Roman soldier, but a tribune, which is a high-ranking. It may just mean very high-ranking. It can also be much more specific, because the Greek term, which you'll have right over here, Kiliarch, means commander of 1,000. That's somebody. If you're commanding 1,000 people, you're somebody. So he says, Scribonius Mucianus, the tribune, made this as commanded, probably commanded by the deity. Now, the second bullet point just tells you a lot about the cultural mix. A military tribune with a Latin name and title writes in Greek and dedicates an altar to a Palmyrene deity in Dura, Europos, which is a Semitic deity. See the mixture? Okay, now here's a painting. Don't rub your eyes. It's not out of focus. That's about that's what it looks like today. Just remember, it has survived nearly 2,000 years before it got uncovered. But here's the temple painting from the same temple, the Temple of Bel, or the Palmyrene gods. And so, as you're straining, and I'm sorry, I'm going to show you some black and white drawings up close, so you get a chance to see it. But let me just kind of orient you. So it's a person standing right here, and there's another one of those smaller altars. His name is right there. This is the standard for the cohort, or the military group there, the regiment. Soldiers back here, 3 deities standing on platforms right there, and 2 goddesses right down here with inscriptions. Everybody got it? Okay, let's start with the tribune, not the one you saw previously, but you can see a lot more detail. So here is the standing altar and putting in the incense right there. And the reasons you have this stand right here, these are the standards of the cohort, and they have a religious function. So it's a dedication asking for blessing, success of the military activities. So here are the soldiers. You see they're in military garb. The tribune right here, military garb, and his name is in Latin, and his name is Julius Terentius, tribune. Now, for some of you who enjoy languages, let me just tell you, it's a real tough issue dealing with inscriptions from this part of the world, regard to the language. And here's why. I like things like punctuation. Y'all like punctuation? You think I'm not. A lot of your inscriptions are all run together, no punctuation. They sometimes use abbreviations. We take languages, Greek, Hebrew, and so forth, and you run into one of these things, and you think, gosh, was my study in vain? I can't figure out a darn thing. It's really tough. It takes quite a bit of time until you get used to this way of. So the name Julius is abbreviated. Terentius is there, and Tribune, T-R-I-B, all run together. Okay, these military figures or deities. My colleagues who write learned papers on these things have argued tooth and nail. Who are they? We won't argue about it. We'll just give this generic title: military figures or deities. I'm not going to give you my opinion because it doesn't matter. It's what they represent. The world of the powers that you need to be connected to have success. Here you'll see the top of the military standard right there. There's the edge of the inscription. And they all look alike when you first glance. The more you look at them, the more you realize they're little individual, not idiosyncrasy, but differences for each one of those. So if we lived back then, we would recognize them. Now, what I mean by that, friends, look at our stained glass windows over here. Without an inscription, we know what they stand for, don't we? But how about somebody who walks in who doesn't? It takes some explaining. So some of these have labels and some don't. These three do not. Okay, so down on the bottom side, see there's the bottom right there of the military stand. There's the edge of the little altar. You have two inscriptions. Now, her face got rubbed out over time. It happens. But the inscription right here says the Tyche of Duros, which tells you they're using the Semitic reference. And here it says the Tyche of Palmyra, written in Greek. Notice the head style. Right, friends? You got the wall or part of the city sitting on both their heads. Tyche was the Greek goddess of fortune, good fortune. And Tyche then became a title. So this is the goddess who's particularly concerned about and protective of Palmyra. And here's the one for Dura, and they're both here because of the business and cultural connection between the two cities. Okay, now here is another painting. Again, it survived pretty well over the centuries. Wouldn't you say, buried? But it had its problems. Nevertheless, so what I'm going to show you here, there's a little inscription that's off to the side. It concerned this man right here, and this is his family. That's his wife, that's his daughter, some other people right here, and they're making a family sacrifice on the small altar, which is right here, and there are two priests who are officiating. So it's a family religious gathering. This was the first painting that was uncovered in the excavation. It was discovered by accident. But it's what led to the interest in the site and the ultimate excavation over several years by the French and Yale University. Okay, so here's a close-up of the two priests and the head of the family. So the standing altar, it has a term in Greek, thaumaterion. Just call it small altar. That will do. And they're getting ready to offer the incense there, which will assist in the prayers and the invoking of a deity's presence. Notice they don't have on shoes. Apparently one of the important things about being a priest is when you had your official duties, you didn't have on your shoes. People who come, of course, do. But there's some times when you approach a deity, you don't wear shoes. Does that remind you of any story you can think of? Moses, take off your shoes. The ground on which you stand is holy. So, here's another form of that reverence. If you're a priest and you're performing, take those shoes off. Okay, so here are two examples from private homes of people who had these for the sweet smell of a gathering and so forth. Nice handiwork, wouldn't you say? This is a kind of early form of enamel right here. The green color, those are the colors of the Parthians. And here's one over here with the animals. It has your dual, actually triple up there. You can get quite a bit of effect if you light all of your holders there. Okay, now, you saw just a moment ago in the painting the Tyche of Palmyra and of Duros. The Semitic word, which is the counterpart, is Gad, G-A-D. And so if you're thinking in terms of Semitic language and culture, here is the Gad or fortune concerned about the city. Same temple. Same temple. We've seen all these things so far. All right, seated right here is a male deity, or male characteristics. And right here is Seleucus, who was the founder of the city. Think about identity. It goes all the way back to the beginning. This was not done for 2 centuries or more after the founding of the city. It shows you about memory and identity. This is how we got the city. It was founded by Seleucus. And the deity right here, probably Zeus, but not named. You do have an inscription down here in a moment. And here's a priest right over here. That's what the inscription says. The Gad of Palmyra. So you don't get the personal name. It's the function. It's important. The Gad of Palmyra, made by Hiram bar Malachus, so again you see the Semitic name. You see his dad and his granddad there, dated 159 CE. It's been, of course, adjusted for our calendar. Now, friends, you think you're looking at the same one, you're not. Just blink your eye. It's actually a completely different carving, but it looks very much like the previous one, and they were near each other. Here you've got the goddess. You got the god and the goddess. With Nike. Nike was the member of the kind of minor deity of victory, carried the laurel of victory. And so here's Nike about to crown the goddess, and of course, what does she have on her head? The city. It's on her head because she cares so much about it. You get a better shot of the view of a priest right here with the robes and conical cap and so forth. Now, the tribes in the area who move about. This is North Arabia. And here's a god, Arzu or Arsu, sometimes with a Z, sometimes with an S. And here are a couple depictions of him on your left there as you're looking at it. Right here's a nice plaque, again the small altar. And because his job as a deity was, among other things, to watch over the caravans for safety. Really, important to be able to move. He's sometimes called the camel rider. That was his, actually a reference to him. And here he's depicted over here. I'll show you this one. There we go. So the inscription right down here says Oga, which means this is a Semitic name. The sculptor has made this to Arsu the camel rider for the life of his son as a vow. I'm willing to bet that Oga's son was involved in the long-distance trade with the camels. So his dad, who's got some skills, carves this, sets it up and says, watch after the life of my son. Okay, a couple of others of the panels, stone panels. Zeus Kurios, more about this one in just a moment, and then Hadad and Atargaddis. Some of you will think, I've been reading the Old Testament, I recognize that name, Hadad. You remember there was a ruler in Damascus whose name was Ben-Hadad? If you don't remember, just nod your head that you do. Ben-Hadad. So Hadad was one of the names of deities known widely in the region. And so Hadad and Atargatis were husband and wife. And Zeus Kurios, Kurios is the Greek word for Lord. So he's Zeus the Lord. Okay. So there is, I'm going to go back one time. I'm showing you this one with some comments. So this was in a little small shrine. Do you call it a temple or not? People can argue till the cows come home. I don't care. It's a shrine. And it was very near the Christian house church, which we'll talk about next week. And so the Greek inscription at the top, it's a bilingual. At the top it says, this was done by a man named Seleucus, it's the same name as the founding dynasty, son of Luke, who holds a lamb. Right there depicted. So Zeus the Lord. The Aramaic, and it's Aramaic and Greek together at the bottom says, this is Barathe, son of Luke, and his son Abu-Buhi, and the deity is Baal-Shamin. You can't get any better illustration of amalgamation, overlap, syncretism than this inscription right here. Same deity, different names, both with long histories, and they've kind of come together, coalesced, as it were. All right, Hercules, a great human/deity, Greek mythology. Here on the right, remember one of his great tasks was to kill the Nemean lion, and he did it. One of his great tasks that he was called to perform. And so that's often the way he's depicted right here. And here's another one of the Semitic deities right here. It has a Greek inscription, though. Notice this deity is standing on the lions right there as a kind of platform, and I'm going to show you this one next. So here's what the inscription says. This shrine, it's a little room, was built for Athlod, god of the city of Anat. See the connection to place? Anat was a city about 60 or 70 miles away on the Euphrates. Adiabodos, the son of Zebdibolos, son of Siloi. I got it all out. Made this after a vow for his salvation. Now, Bill's sitting over here. He's going to know what's the Greek word for salvation. It's up there. Soterios. Same word the New Testament uses. For his children and for his entire house. Set this up in honor of this deity, that it might go well with his family and his entire house. Okay, Aphrodite, the goddess of love. This is a plaque. You can see the frame of it right here. It was set in a niche. Still see some of the colors right here. It was found in a private home near the Army barracks. And I don't know if this is true or not, but the excavator thought it might be a brothel because of that. I don't see why that makes any difference. In any case, yet one more way of talking about the world of the powers and the delights and the threats and how one integrates one's life into it. This is the kind of larger culture of Dura Europos. Now, friends, I'm going to stop right here, take a break of about 10 or 12 minutes. I'll answer a question to you if you like. When you come back, we're going to the synagogue. Please say that's okay. Okay, I'm wired. And I didn't drink any coffee, but I'm wired. Okay, friends, let's go to the synagogue. Remember, it also backed up to the western wall, and because of the debris that came when the wall was pushed in the seal, is the reason we have this wonderful treasure that I'm about to show you. Okay, in 1932, the Yale archaeologist found the ruins of a synagogue. It has 58 painted scenes in it. Some are small, like this, and some are large, as wide as this table. And they're stacked up 3 segments tall in places. Now, as you can see from the bullet point there, when the siege in 256 happened, the collapse sealed the building. We don't know how long the synagogue had been there, probably only a few decades, but that's a guess. But it had been updated and expanded in the year 244, so just 12 years before it came to an end. Almost certainly, the paintings that you see were done in this expansion. That's not for certain, but that's likely. Almost certainly. So the remains of the synagogue were taken up. I don't want to show you. There's a black and white I was looking at a couple of weeks ago showing when they were actually cutting through the wall to take the paintings away and wrap them up, ship them, put them on the boat, and send them over to New Haven, where they have been looked at. Some of the stuff from the synagogue, however, was sent to Damascus. And so if you want to see most of the paintings of the synagogue, they're actually in a separate room all by themselves in the National Museum in Damascus. That keeps a lot of people from our country in seeing them, because Damascus has not been typically a place that many Americans have gone to visit, and that's our loss. Okay, so friends, if you will look at this very briefly, at the top right here is the Western Wall. Okay? Nod your head. We're all together. And so here is the synagogue, had a little courtyard here, and here is the synagogue itself where they gathered for worship. And right in front of it was a series of rooms. It's called the Temple of Adonis. I mean, they are literally next door. There's hardly any room between the orange and the red. Would you agree with that? I mean, they're right next to each other. See them here. And the carving that I showed you early on of the woman with the wall on her head and the doves and so forth, it came from right there, right next to the synagogue, showing you how close the cultural interaction was in this place. Okay, just so you'll know that the ruins of the Temple of Adonis are there on the left-hand side, right there, and the synagogue here on the right. They're even less, I mean, I'm just showing you that it was actually there. Almost everything's been carted off. In recent years, I have to say that the ISIS forces who were in the area have gone and knocked down a number of things, even if there was hardly anything left to knock down, and dug around. So both Palmyra and Dura, Europos are in bad shape now because of the plundering and the ignorance of the ISIS people. That sounds like a harsh thing to say, but I think it's true. The harshness is true. Okay, here's a nice isometric to give you an idea. If you'll think of it again, this is a little bit larger. There's the wall. The wall had these towers, evenly spaced out. And there was a little gate right here. And so the little temple complex was here, and here is the courtyard and the synagogue itself. So it's facing to the west. The natural light had windows right here, really slotted openings. Okay, so here are 2 pictures. If you're welcome to look at the bullet points, but I put these side by side. So when you walked in, the center thing you would see is right here, but I've shown you that's looking west, going in that direction. Here then is the south wall, and here is the north wall, and you can see how the debris fell, can't you? How it slopes down, when they pushed the wall over and sealed it, that's what happened. Everything above this did not survive. Everything that got sealed, of course, did survive. Now, there are a number of ceiling tiles, mostly of geometric design, but occasionally it might have something else in them, and a couple of small inscriptions. They fell down, so some of them survived enough to be deciphered or copied. But a lot of that was also destroyed. But you can see very clearly here the slope of the debris as it came down and sealed the place. Now, I'm not much of a scholar on ancient art, but I'm told from what I read that these are not technically frescoes. I've always called them that, and like a number of issues, I was wrong. It's actually tempera painting, which is fairly widespread in the ancient world. And some of you will know this better than I do, but tempera painting means you take the pigments, might have some water, but you will then mix it with a bonding agent. It might be resin, but the most popular thing actually was raw eggs. It makes for a nice bonding and permanence. So it's tempera painting. Okay, I'll just pause here for a moment. This is what it looks like in its room in the Damascus Museum, where the main parts of the synagogue have been reassembled. And it just catches my breath every time I see it. Love to take students there, just to walk. I don't have to say anything. The very center part here is what's called the Torah shrine. That's where they kept the scrolls. And the scrolls have been taken out. They would be read and commented on the Sabbath and during various festivals and holidays. That's the center, and I'll come back to this at the end of my presentation here. And so what you see here are scenes from the Old Testament right here. You have smaller things down here at the bottom, which are like animals and daily life. But you can see large panels all right here telling various stories. And what I'm going to do for the next, about 20 minutes or so is I'm going to show you panel after panel. Let you look at them. Some of them have survived better than others. So enjoy the visual feast, and we'll talk briefly about several of them. At the end, I'm going to talk to you about the Torah shrine right here and the painting on the top of it. Okay, so there were a couple of building inscriptions that were found off to the side. We have a building inscription for our sanctuary here out front, and one of them here you'll see is in Aramaic. This one as well, and they didn't provide much information except they give you a couple names of the people who were there and a date of the expansion. The date, of course, is calibrated in our calendar to be 244. They also had some Greek inscriptions. Over here, it's kind of faint for you to see, just trust me, but they are. And some of the red paint has survived, and I have, but I didn't put it on here. I'm sorry to say, it's a mistake. One of them is fairly clear in the red. It's this top one, the bottom right one right there, and the name Samuel is there. So we know the name of 3 or 4 of the people who worship there, and Samuel is one of them. And by the way, he has a title in Greek. I got a big smile on my face. Presbyteros. Presbyterian, he's an elder. Samuel the elder. He was the elder there in the congregation, in the synagogue there. Now, here's an interesting thing where there's a different kind of audience who might spend a little more time on it. This is in Persian, and it tells about a couple of officials from the Parthians who'd come to look at this. Now, what it may mean, in quotes, friends, what it may mean is that a portion of the Jewish community that moved there and built this came from the east. That shouldn't surprise you. I mean, after all, in the Old Testament, remember after the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, they came back after the exile, nod your heads, and they started rebuilding. You remember there were 2 people who were very instrumental in this. One was called Ezra, and one was called Nehemiah. Please say yes. Good, thank you. Let's make sure you. They both came from the east. They both were sent by the Persians from Persia to come back because during the exile, many of the best educated people were taken off into exile. And so an Ezra, who was a priest from a priestly family, and Nehemiah, who was not from a priestly family, both came back to help start the community. So it wouldn't be surprising that there would be a Persian connection. That's a maybe, but certainly plausible. Okay, now, so you can see here in the diagram, I won't spend any time on it, how the debris came down either side here, like this. And the panels are named. This came from one of the original excavation reports, and it tells you about the labels because, it provides labels for the paintings because with almost no exception, there are no labels. On one of them, there's written a little Aramaic script that said, Moses leading them out of Egypt. Otherwise, you have to guess. And some of these can have more than one root in the scriptural narrative, and some of them are not obvious. It hurt my pride when I first started going through these. I say, I've got education. I know what that is. No, I didn't. On several occasions, I said, what might that be? So some of these are guess. Others are quite obvious. Okay, so the niche right here in the center, as it's sometimes called, and there are the stairs where the person who read the Torah and the prophets and who offered the sermon and comments would stand. The scrolls would be placed there. And so here would be the western wall. That's what you see when you first come in. Then you look to your left and your right, and it also has, you see, on three sides, the paintings. So once you see these, you'll realize that they come from the first 5 books, the Torah, and from what our friends in the synagogue will call the former prophets. You'll think of them as the history books, Samuel and Kings. But they're considered prophets among our Jewish friends. And so basically what you get are pictures of the unfolding story of the Old Testament. You'll have the ancestors, the patriarchs. You'll have Moses and Aaron. You'll have David and Solomon, and it will go on down. Almost all, but not all, almost all of them come then what we would call the lectionary cycle. You probably know in a synagogue, whenever they gather officially, I'll say it again, whenever they gather officially for worship or a festival, they have set readings. And they're going to read them, and they're going to expound them. Yesterday, for example, in the synagogue was the festival, not the festival, it's called Tish B'Av, where they remember and lament the destruction of the 2 temples. On that day, they read the entire book of Lamentations. The entire book of Lamentations in one sitting. Because the Lamentations remind them of that first destruction that took place, the Babylonians. Okay, so what you really have is visual reinforcement of what is read every Sabbath. Got the point, friends? Now, I would love to have the notes of the painter, why the painter chose A scene and left out B, because there are lots of scenes in the Old Testament, right? We don't have that. A couple of clues. One, the one prophet that you will think of as a prophet comes naturally to is Ezekiel. There are several panels about Ezekiel. None about Isaiah, none about Jeremiah, none about Hosea, but Ezekiel. Do you remember where Ezekiel's ministry took place? Ezekiel had his call to ministry in Babylon, in the east. Again, what may be a connection for the people. One of the prominent pictures that you'll see up here, which is not in the book of prophets normally read on a regular basis, is the book of Esther. It's only read one time a year, Festival of Purim. There's a big panel of Esther. Where was Esther? In the east. So those are the clues, such as they are, and they're not necessarily persuasive, but they may be, of an Eastern connection. Okay, one more time, just to give you kind of visual overload. Can you imagine in pristine form what it would have been like to walk into that synagogue, say in the year 250? Who thought this was worthwhile doing? I mean, I do. I mean, who paid for that? It's an amazing thing. Maybe it was Samuel, the Presbyterian. Okay, standing figures. The one on the left almost certainly is Moses, reading the law that was handed down to him. On the right, it's hard to tell, and so some folks say, well, that's Abraham, others think it's Moses. We're not going to have that debate. Okay, this one you know, friends, don't you? Look at it carefully. That's right. That's Samuel on the left with the horn. It's got oil in it. This is the anointing of David to be the future king of Israel. And one of the interesting things about this is the painter put the royal purple already on David at the time of anointing. The only people in the ancient world who wore purple were royalty or people who thought they were lucky, because they were making a claim they may not be able to back up. Purple was for royalty. So there's David being anointed. All right, how about this one? And again, it's a little blurry. Not the photograph, it's the painting itself. All right, so you see somebody here in priestly vestments. If your eyes are really good, you'll see the word in Greek, Aaron. Now, here's a reproduction of it, kind of pulling out some things. So, here's Aaron the priest. His ministry took place during the time of the tabernacle. Right, friends? Well, the tabernacle also has the same function as the temple. So here's a bit of an anachronism. Can you imagine? The tabernacle is depicted here essentially as a temple, kind of movable temple. It's less tent, more building. Now, they weren't confused. They were just talking about how it is that one aspect of the storyline continues down into the time that they would recognize, namely temple worship. Of course, by the time this was done, the temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed. So there are all kinds of things we might discuss about this, and we won't. But it shows you the interest. So you've got, for example, Aaron right here. He has two sons who survived him in ministry. That's probably who they are. You'll see the bull here and the ram right there, two of your common animal sacrifices, particularly for the Day of Atonement, the single most solemn day of the year. Here's the red heifer right here. It was needed to set up the worship for the first time. Whenever the temple was established, you needed the blood of a red heifer. It was very special. So it's over here. And there were other members of the clan of Levi who may be represented over here. So there are all kinds of elements that may play into this, that our friends who worship there would just kind of nod and yes, that may escape us. Okay, how about this one, friends? You got this one? I'm dancing. Yeah, that's baby Moses, don't you think? So there is the basket. It turns out the word for basket and the word for ark are the same, and so often in art, Moses is put in a little ark, as it is right there. And number of figures right here. Let's advance first of all right there. Baby Moses is Pharaoh's daughter. And this is, if you think I'm wrong on this, please tell me. This is probably Princess, Pharaoh's daughter. Because remember, according to the storyline, she went to take a bath. finds the baby. And perhaps these right here are her attendants, maybe. Probably over here would be the mother and the sister of Moses. So part of what you'll see here, and I'll show you a longer version of it in a moment, is you have several aspects of the story kind of all spread out at once. So, a snapshot is one snapshot in time, but a painting tries to show you several aspects of the story as it unfolds. Here's what I mean by that. Okay, so here is the longer panel. That's really big. So let's go right to left. Everybody with me? So there is Egypt, the city of Egypt. And there's Pharaoh, and he's got a scribe right here, and somebody right here is making a proclamation. Perhaps this is a way of saying, do you remember that the Pharaoh said, you throw the little boys into the river, remember? Get rid of the little boys, the babies. So then here are two women right here. Do you remember there were two Hebrew midwives who said, not doing that. We fear God more than we fear Pharaoh. That's quite a line, right? So that's probably who that is. That's a guess anyway. And they're going to put the baby there. So then here you'll see Pharaoh's daughter. And then right here, do you remember also in the story that they had to get somebody to watch after the baby that they found? It turned out to be the sister, right? And in tradition, it was the sister and the mother. So perhaps what you have here is we're trying to tell a story. So here is the mom and the sister, and here's the mom and sister again over here taking care of things, and there's with the baby. So you've got 4 or 5 little vignettes in the longer story, all in this one painting. Okay, the larger baby Moses panel. Okay, now here's one. It's obvious what's going on. The question is, where is it rooted in the biblical storyline? It took me a while to figure this one out because I didn't want to depend on the scholars to tell me. I said, I'm going to figure it out. I had 5 or 6 missed guesses. It's probably, almost certainly, Elijah at Mount Carmel. And one of the things that you see people bringing in wood and water here, remember for the altar? You put the water on it, and he called down fire from heaven. Remember that one? And so that's probably what this is because there's another one of Elijah coming up in a moment of Elijah raising the child from the dead. And they're side by side. So that's one of the clues. You have at least some context here. But these are all, remember, prominent stories from Samuel and Kings, right? Which they would be reading about regularly and commenting on. All right, here's one. The top of it did not survive very well. But it's somebody in a purple robe sitting here. Probably David as installed king. Remember he had on a purple robe when he got anointed earlier? All right, here's one. Look at it carefully, friends. You can see there's a well right here. The tabernacle's right there. Streams of water going out from it. Tabernacle right here. Moses and the water in the wilderness. Now, you may recall there was a tradition, it's quoted in the book of, or the letter of 1 Corinthians, that a rock or a well or whatever kind of, as it were, followed along the way the wandering in the wilderness to provide water. And there are several accounts in Numbers and Exodus, not one but several, like 4 or 5 of them talk about where they got water, when they didn't get water, it struck the rock, how this. When St. Paul writes to the Corinthians, he says, you remember that rock was like Christ, or in fact was Christ who provided nourishment in the wilderness. So here is a kind of amalgamation of the getting of water, but it tells you a little bit about how they did community. So if you were to count, you'll get 12 tents for the 12 tribes of Israel. The tabernacle's back here, there's the menorah. They camped around the tabernacle, and here's the life-giving water going out to all the different tribes and their tents right there that God provides in the wilderness. There's a reproduction of it. It's a little clearer there. It touched up the colors and so forth. Okay, here is the one of child being healed by the prophet. Okay, now here's one. Take a look at it. Lots going on in it. These are some of your smaller panels down here. So this is at the first level. Someone sits on a throne right there. Somebody's riding a horse and being pulled by somebody. This is the story of Esther and Mordecai. So, again, this is one of these where several elements of the story in the book we call Esther are all put together in one painting. So, for example, right here, you may recall there was a guy, he's known as Wicked Haman. And Wicked Haman was told that he had to put Mordecai on a horse and lead him around and give praises to him in the city because Mordecai had foiled a plot against the king, right? Which Wicked Haman hated. So that's part of the story right there. Notice the outfit he's wearing. That same outfit is right here. So Mordecai was given a place of authority. Now back here is a woman finely dressed and sitting down. Who might that be? That's got to be Esther. Right there. Here's the one story that does not come out of Kings and Samuel, but it comes from the east. Very prominent here in the synagogue. Okay, now look at this one. It's a lot of jumble. Two guys right here leading a bunch of people. And here's some body parts and so forth. This is the crossing of the Red Sea, probably. Moses and Aaron and the Exodus. All right, here is the going out from Egypt. You can't see it here, but there's a little inscription that was down here, and it was very faint. It said, Moses leading them out of Egypt. So that one actually had a title to it. Moses was central. Several of the individual pictures are of Moses, like this one that you're seeing there on the right, and his actions in leading the people out of Egypt and providing, mediating the law from God to the people and so forth, absolutely central. Now, what I like about this one is, you remember he was told at the burning bush to take off his shoes or his sandals? They're boots here. See them? Those are like Parthian boots or something. I think I'm safe in saying Moses would have been caught dead in Parthian boots. But a little anachronism goes a long way, doesn't it? Okay, now here's one I never got until somebody could help me. There are 3 or 4 panels put together of the prophet Ezekiel. Do you remember that Ezekiel was out and he was in the valley of the dry bones? And the Lord says, start preaching. And they came back to life. That's what this scene almost certainly is right here. Even though it's not bones, you see it's just the parts right there. But they're coming out. But Ezekiel plays a prominent role here, not Isaiah or Jerusalem. Again, perhaps because of the Eastern connection. Okay, you may remember that the Ark of the Covenant was captured. Those early chapters in 1 Samuel. And it was taken to the temple of Dagon, and then one day the Philistines got up and the statue of Dagon had been toppled and so forth, and so they said, we've got to get rid of this ark. So here's the ark being taken back out after it decimated the Philistines. Okay, now I want to take you for this last little bit, friends. We're about 5-6 minutes and I'll be done. The central Torah shrine. So that's the first thing that you will see when you come in. It's an eye level. And remember, it's the niche where they kept or cabinet, where they kept the scrolls to be read. Because Judaism quite conservative in a number of traditions. Even though people begin to develop what's called a codex or a book, scrolls. So they had the individual scrolls, they had them wrapped, and they were often decorated, and it would line them up in the cabinet. And here they would be, some of them would be brought in, the ones that to be read on a particular day, and they would be placed there before the service, and they would be brought out and paraded around and read and commented on. Okay, so here's one kind of close-up of it. A couple of things to note right here. It does have a scene on it, and I'll show it to you. It has a conch shell right there. And those kinds of decorations are often used for temples, for entrances, as if you're going in, a pearl of great price or wisdom or whatever is inside. Okay, so there's a three-part biblical scene on the top, and I think I'll have one more to show you, but this may be, let's just see here. Yeah, let's come back here. So the upper scene's in three parts. You see the menorah right here. You see the temple right here. And you see Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac on the right. Genesis 22. Very important for the scene. According to 2 Chronicles, the Temple Mount area in Jerusalem was Mount Moriah. In the New Testament, the emphasis, and understandably so, is on the fact that Abraham did not have to sacrifice finally his son, but that God would offer his son on behalf of the gain for redemption. I love that. But if you're Jewish, what other things are you going to learn from this? The clue is in that second bullet point. The sacrifice of Isaac and the temple. So in the story in Genesis 22, verse 14, after Isaac is almost sacrificed, remember they find the ram, horns caught in the thicket, right, friends? You know the story. The ram is then sacrificed instead. It's a story early in the Bible to explain the principle of substitution. A sacrifice, something you bring to represent and to substitute for. And so the lamb was the substitute, a life given that had been demanded, which Isaac was about to fulfill, but didn't. Okay, so in Genesis 22, verse 14, it says, "So Abraham called that place, the Lord shall provide, because, as it says today, that would be the day of the writer, some centuries later, at the mount, it still says, the Lord shall provide." See, the whole sacrificial system is being explained in this painting. People bring sacrifices, substitute, self-giving, and so forth, but it's because God has already provided everything. God provided that lamb. God provided what you needed to offer there. God provides for the people. So they call the place the Lord has provided or seen. So that, friends, is what decorates, not decorates, that's a bad term, isn't it? That's what frames the closet, the niche, the cabinet of the Scriptures and gives them meaning. The Lord provides what we need. Thank you very much. For those who need to run, you can. If you have a question, you're welcome to ask it, and I'll try to answer it. Yes, sir.
You have one very personal story about when these things mean a lot to you and to us. And you were traveling over there. You met a person there, and then later these things were destroyed. So many of them that had not been taken out. You had a very personal story about a person who tried to save them. Would you just
I'll tell it very quickly. And Chris, one thing I was supposed to do, and I didn't, somebody asked me at break time, how large was Dura Europos? Inside the walls, it was about 128 to 30 acres. I should have said that earlier, and I didn't, and I apologize. Okay, the personal story goes like this. Remember, Palmyra and Dura Europos are two cities that were linked in a variety of ways. I used to take travel groups to this part of the world. I never went to Dura Europos. It's so far to get out there and back. But I would go to Palmyra. And the last time I was there, I took the students there. We went through the museum, and we walked through all of the incomparable things to see there in Palmyra. And we went to a little restaurant across the street from the museum, because the museum closed at 2, and we were going to have lunch. It turns out that the Syrian director of antiquities for the whole region happened to be there. And we're talking about Palmyra. And he came to our group. He said, his English is pretty good. He said, we don't get many Americans here. Thank you so much for coming. We have a wonderful country with all kinds of things in it, to which we agreed and thanked him. When the ISIS people took over in the area, Palmyra was part of it, as was Dura Europos. And this man, his name was Assad. It's very similar to the name of the president. Sorry. So he took some things out of the museum and had them hidden because he knew that the ISIS people would try to sell them. So they captured him and they worked on him and tortured him to try to make him tell where those things were hidden. And then they killed him and hung him up there in among the ruins in Palmyra. It's, I hate to think about that story. Yeah. May I ask with a question? It's kind of it's a downer, isn't it? But, yes, ma'am, please. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. No.
Or are they just the ones that only survived, or were they not in other places?
Thank you. I didn't want to oversell my presentation, but they are unique. There's nothing like them from this time period. Now, I will say this. In synagogues 100 and 200 years later, there are a number of things which are put in mosaic floors. Someday I'll do that presentation for you. But in terms of paintings, there's nothing like this. There could have been a handful of them that didn't survive, but these are absolutely unique. Stunning, aren't they? Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It was a group from what is today Iran. They were called the Sasanians. And they had, like a lot of people, decided that they need to expand. And they wanted to control Dura Europos, and the people there who had some cultural connections with them did not want to give in. And so they laid siege to the place and destroyed it. And part of it had to do with the Roman soldiers who were there, who made it more difficult to surrender. I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect if the Roman soldiers hadn't been there, then the Dura Europans would have said, okay, you're stronger than we are, we give in. But as they say, where I grew up in North Carolina, they got to fighting. And look what happened. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It seems to be one brilliant individual did this. That's the most frequent conclusion. Brilliant person. The painter was brilliant, and whoever designed it was brilliant. Anybody else with a question? Yeah. Great question. You can see a depiction of, say, Zeus or Atargatis, and it won't always look exactly the same. but typically in the presentation of a deity, there'll be certain characteristics that help them stand out. It's interesting that you would hone in on the face, which is what we would often do, but more often it would have to be with, say, the garment or the kind of throne they're sitting on or their headdress. That would be more of a clue than the actual face. But to your point, one of the interesting things to me about this is how human are all the gods. There's a sense in which they're kind of reduced almost to our level. Now, in the synagogue, again, great question. In the synagogue, no depiction of deity. God transcends a depiction like that. Indeed, they're commanded not to make a graven image. You're not going to see a depiction of God. One of the things that would set the synagogue apart from its neighbors, including that temple right next door. I mean, they may have even shared a walkway or a wall. Go in peace. You can see the church in the Mithraeum if you come.